Lila and Max had always loved watching Cocomelon, but one quiet evening, the cheerful songs turned sinister. What started as innocent cartoons soon began to follow them, whispering their names, moving when no one was looking. Every reflection, every shadow in the house seemed alive, and the line between the screen and reality began to disappear. That night, they realized the show wasn't just entertainment, it was watching, waiting, and it wanted them next. I remember the first time I noticed something strange. My niece had asked me to babysit, and like most kids, she loved Cocomelon. I had seen the show countless times before, and at first I thought nothing of it. The colorful characters danced across the screen, their familiar songs filling the quiet living room. But then I noticed it. Something about the way the characters moved. Their eyes weren't just blinking, they seemed to track me, following me as I shifted in my chair. I told myself it was just my imagination. My eyes were tired from work, and the soft glow of the television made everything feel a little off. I shook my head and tried to focus on my niece, who was completely absorbed in the show, clapping along to the music. As the evening wore on, I began to feel a growing sense of unease. The songs played on loop, and something about the rhythm started to feel wrong. The laughter of the animated children on screen wasn't light or happy, it was hollow, stretched, like it had been slowed down. I could swear I heard whispers under the singing, tiny words I couldn't quite make out. My skin prickled and I found myself glancing nervously around the room. The familiar furniture seemed to loom in the shadows, warped and darker than usual. I tried to convince myself it was normal. Maybe I was just imagining things, reading too much into a harmless children's program. But then it happened. I noticed a small shadow flitting across the corner of my vision near the television. I froze. At first I thought it was my imagination again, some trick of the flickering light from the screen. But the shadow moved deliberately, almost as if it had a mind of its own. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and the shadow was still there, creeping closer to the edge of the sofa where I sat. My heart began to race. I wanted to stand, to leave the room, but some invisible force seemed to hold me in place. My niece didn't notice anything. She was humming along with the distorted song, completely unaware of what I was seeing. I told myself I needed to look away, to distract myself, but I couldn't. The characters on the screen, usually cheerful and bright, now seemed rigid, their smiles too wide, their eyes unnervingly intense. For a moment, I felt as if they were aware of me in a way that went beyond animation. They were alive somehow, and they were watching me. My stomach twisted into knots, and I could feel the cold sweat spreading across my back. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to escape the living room and shut the door behind me. But I was rooted to the spot, unable to tear my gaze away. Then the shadow shifted again, moving closer to the television. It wasn't fast, but it was purposeful, deliberate, and that's when I saw it. A tiny figure in the corner, faint, but unmistakable, mirroring the smallest animated character on the screen. Its eyes glimmered for a brief moment, and for a second, I could have sworn it smiled at me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and a shiver ran through my body. I stumbled backward, tripping over the edge of the carpet, and fell to the floor. The lights in the room flickered, and the shadow disappeared as suddenly as it had appeared. But the sense of being watched didn't leave me. I huddled on the floor for what felt like hours, listening to the warped Cocomelon music echo faintly through the room, my mind racing. I realized then that something in the show wasn't right, and that it might be aware of me, following me, waiting. And even as I tried to calm myself, I felt a cold breath brush against my neck, though no one was there. After that night, I couldn't stop thinking about what I had seen. I kept telling myself it was just my imagination, but the feeling of being watched lingered like a dark stain in the corners of my mind. During the day, everything seemed normal, but as soon as night fell, the unease returned. The Cocomelon theme song had a way of sneaking into my thoughts even when the television was off. I could hear faint notes drifting through the house, soft and distorted, almost like a whisper in the walls. I checked every room, every device, but nothing was on. The sound persisted, distant but unmistakable, as if the show had found a way to exist without a screen. One evening, I decided to turn the TV on again, hoping that facing it would make the fear stop. The colors flashed brightly, almost painfully vibrant, and the characters danced across the screen in their usual patterns. But there was a difference. I could see it in their eyes. They weren't just following my movements anymore. They seemed to be studying me, waiting. The baby character, the one with the round face and tiny tuft of hair, stared directly at me, and for a moment I could have sworn its eyes glinted red. My pulse quickened, and I felt an icy chill creep up my spine. The room felt smaller, suffocating, as if the walls themselves were pressing inward. Then I noticed something even more disturbing. The mouths of the characters were moving in ways that didn't match the song. They were forming shapes, letters, and though I couldn't understand them at first, I realized they were spelling something. I leaned in, heart hammering, and the letters slowly came together to form my name. I couldn't breathe. My fingers trembled as I reached for the remote, but it slipped from my hand as if some invisible force had pulled it away. The baby character tilted its head, its smile widening unnaturally, and I felt a strange, magnetic pull drawing me closer to the screen. I stumbled backward, tripping over the carpet, and when I looked up, the TV was no longer in its usual place. It was reflected in the hallway mirror across the room. My stomach dropped. The baby stood in the mirror, smiling at me, perfectly still, except for the eyes, which followed every movement I made. I froze, realizing my reflection wasn't moving in sync with me. My own image watched in terror as the baby waved. Panic overtook me, and I tried to turn away, but the mirror seemed to stretch endlessly, trapping me in its black, glassy surface. The air in the room grew heavy, and I could hear the faintest sound of tiny footsteps creeping closer. I wanted to scream, to run, to smash the mirror, but my body refused to obey. Every instinct screamed that if I moved, it would come closer. The letters on the screen began to twist and warp, forming jagged, impossible shapes, while the baby's smile grew wider and darker, like a shadow stretching into reality. I backed into the corner of the hallway, my heart hammering in my ears, and just before I lost consciousness from fear, the baby blinked one last time and vanished, leaving the screen black, the mirror still reflecting nothing but my terrified face. But even in the silence that followed, I knew it hadn't gone. After that night, sleep became nearly impossible. Even during the day, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was no longer mine. Every shadow, every creak of the floorboards felt like it was part of a larger presence I couldn't see. The Cocomelon theme song had lodged itself into my mind, looping endlessly, warped and wrong. I tried to cover my ears, distract myself with music or podcasts, anything to drown it out, but the distorted melody always found a way back. The whispering undertone had grown louder, forming words I couldn't recognize, but somehow understood. They were calling me, beckoning me closer. One afternoon, desperate for normalcy, I decided to watch the show with my niece again, hoping that understanding it might break the tension. The bright colors were almost painful to my eyes, but I forced myself to focus on the screen. At first it seemed normal, like the innocent cartoon I remembered. But then I noticed the tiniest details. The characters' shadows didn't match the light in the room, and their movements were slightly off, jerky, as though they were being controlled by something else. The baby character crawled toward the edge of the screen, and when I looked closer, I saw its eyes glinting, not the soft brown I expected, but a deep, glowing red that made my stomach churn. Suddenly, the letters on the screen shifted again, forming shapes and patterns that made no sense at first. Then, painfully, I realized they were forming my name, letter by letter, moving slowly across the screen as if mocking me. My hands shook, and I could feel the hair on my arm standing on end. I tried to move, but it was as if the room itself had become a cage. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to run, but my legs refused to cooperate. I could hear something behind me, tiny footsteps padding softly on the carpet, too small to be human. I dared not turn, fearing what I might see. When I finally mustered the courage, I glanced over my shoulder, and the hallway behind me was filled with faint, ghostly versions of the characters. They weren't solid. They flickered like broken holograms, crawling along the walls and ceiling, multiplying with each passing second. The baby was at the center, its tiny hands reaching out as if it could step through the thin veil separating its world from mine. The sound of distorted singing and giggling filled my ears, vibrating through my chest until I felt my head might split. I stumbled backward, trying to escape, but each step seemed to lead me deeper into their domain rather than toward the door. The most terrifying part was realizing that the reflections in the mirrors weren't mine anymore. They were children, small versions of me, smiling wide and eerily blank, their eyes glowing faintly in sync with the red glint of the baby's. They waved at me, beckoning me closer, and I knew with a sudden sickening certainty that the show had found a way to pull me into its world. My own reflection screamed silently, mouth moving, but no sound came out. I slammed my eyes shut, covering my ears, trying to block it all out. When I dared to open them again, the room was empty, the screen black, the mirrors showing only my trembling face. But I knew it wasn't over. Sleep had become a distant memory. Every sound, every flicker of light made my heart pound as though it were trying to escape my chest. The house no longer felt like a safe place. It felt alive, breathing, watching me. I tried to distract myself, to convince myself that it was just stress or exhaustion, but the warped Cocomelon theme song haunted my mind constantly. Even when I left the room, I could hear the faintest hint of it, a soft echo from nowhere, like it was embedded in the walls themselves. The feeling of being watched never left. Everywhere I went, I felt tiny eyes following me, shifting just out of sight. One evening, I decided to face it again. Maybe if I understood what was happening, I could reclaim my home. I turned on the TV, bracing myself for the distorted brightness. The characters were there, as usual, but something was different. They weren't just dancing anymore. They were positioned strategically, lining the edges of the screen, their eyes all pointed at me. The baby character stood in the center, its tiny hands resting on its knees, leaning forward, staring. The room grew colder instantly, and my breath came out in short, visible puffs. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body was rooted to the floor. Then I heard it, the faintest giggle coming from behind me. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. My chest tightened with panic. The giggling grew louder, echoing around the house, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. I realized with a shock that it wasn't normal laughter. It was distorted, warped, angry. I could hear whispers mixed in, syllables I didn't understand, but that felt like commands. The baby on the screen began to move differently now, crawling slowly toward the edge, its red eyes fixed on me. I stumbled backward, my legs trembling, and then I saw them. Tiny versions of the baby, scattered around the room, some hanging from the ceiling, some creeping along the walls. Their movement was unnatural, jerking in ways that made my stomach twist. The screen's colors shifted violently, becoming harsher, almost bleeding into the room. It was no longer just a show, it was a window into something else, a world that shouldn't exist. Every reflection in the mirrors now held dozens of the tiny children, staring at me with blank, glowing eyes, their mouths opening impossibly wide, silent screams stretching across their faces. I realized the house itself was being invaded, overtaken by the nightmare from the screen. I tried to unplug the TV, smash it, anything to stop it, but my hands passed through the remote as if it weren't there. The laughter and singing grew louder, vibrating the floor beneath me. I backed into a corner, heart hammering, and the worst part hit me. The distorted reflections weren't just mimicking me anymore. They were alive, moving independently, whispering words I couldn't understand, beckoning me closer to the TV. I felt a pull, magnetic, irresistible, and I knew that if I let it, I would step into the screen and never return. I tried to resist, clawing at the walls, but it was as if the house itself was pushing me forward, forcing me to confront the impossible. And then, as suddenly as it began, the lights went out. The room fell silent. Only the faint glow of the screen remained, and in it, the baby leaned forward, staring, smiling, waiting. I realized then that whatever was in the show wasn't just in the house anymore. It had found a way into me. That night I decided I had to leave. I couldn't stay in the house any longer. Every shadow seemed alive, every creak and whisper a warning. I packed a small bag, grabbing only the essentials, and moved toward the front door, determined to escape this nightmare. But as I reached for the handle, it slammed shut on its own with a deafening bang. My heart leapt into my throat. I tried again, pushing with all my strength, but the door wouldn't budge. Panic took over. The house had become a prison, and the walls themselves seemed to pulse, breathing around me. I turned, desperate, and froze. The living room had transformed. The TV wasn't on its stand anymore. It hung from the ceiling, spinning slowly like a macabre pendulum. The baby from the show floated in the center of the room, its small body suspended in midair, its eyes glowing faintly red. The other characters appeared around it, forming a circle, their blank smiles stretching unnaturally. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The air was thick, heavy, pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. The more I tried to move, the slower my body felt, like I was wading through invisible sludge. And then I saw it, the reflection in the spinning TV. At first I thought it was my own terrified face, but it wasn't. It was me, or someone who looked exactly like me as a child, wearing the same clothes as the animated children on the screen. Its eyes glinted red, and its smile was wide, impossibly wide. Behind that reflection, dozens of tiny hands pressed against the inside of the screen, their small fingers reaching out toward me as if trying to pull me in. I stumbled backward, my head spinning, and realized the room was no longer just a room. It was an extension of the TV, a warped dimension where the line between reality and animation no longer existed. I tried to run to the hallway, but the walls stretched and shifted, forming a maze that trapped me. Every reflection I passed showed more versions of myself, all smiling, all reaching, all watching. The music, the distorted, warped Cocomelon song filled my mind, vibrating my skull until I felt like it would split in two. My vision blurred, and I felt myself being pulled forward, toward the spinning TV, toward the floating baby at its center. I clawed at the carpet, at the walls, trying to resist, but the pull was too strong. And then the lights went out completely. Silence. Darkness. My body hit the floor with a thud, and I thought it was over, that somehow I had been dragged into the void and left alone. But a faint glow appeared above me. The TV screen was floating just above my head, spinning slowly. And on it, the baby leaned forward, staring directly at me. Its mouth opened impossibly wide, wider than it should have been, and a soft, chilling whisper escaped. "It's your turn now." I screamed, but the sound didn't leave my mouth, and then everything went black.